Welcome to this week's FASA Leadership Lounge, where we are going to dive into the policies shaping the work of Florida's school leaders. I am Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I am Jessica Janasiewicz, lobbyist for FASA and several school districts across Florida.
So let's talk about what's new and going on. Recently, the Department of Education released a handful of memos with some pretty important updates. One of the big ones was a chart that pulls together all of last year's legislative changes and lays out what districts need to do at the local level. They also rolled out a list of persistently low performing schools using that new bottom 10% formula, and on top of that, shared a few school safety updates.
And that is just the start. During the 2025 legislative session, lawmakers passed 88 different bills that will have some kind of local impact on school districts. These cover a wide range of topics, everything from hazardous walking conditions to later school start times, diabetes management, cell phone use in schools, the Bright Futures program, and a lot more. We've got the full file in the members only section on our website, so you can access that anytime to see these bills.
Of course, and one big change came in Senate Bill 2510, which redefined what it means to be a persistently low performing school. So now a school falls into that category if it meets at least one of these three criteria. Number one, if it's earned below a C grade in 3 of the last 5 years and hasn't earned a B or higher in the last 2. Number two, if the school closed within 2 years after filing a notice of intent. 3, if it has been in the bottom 10% for 2 out of the last 3 years based on FAST assessments in grade 3 ELA or grade 4 math, which could lead to why, when you look at the list, if you go to the website, you will be able to see the full chart. You'll see some schools in there that have A and B grades for 2025, but it could be that they fell into one of those previous categories.
That makes sense. Shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about student mental health. It continues to be a major focus. Back in May, Governor DeSantis signed HB 969 into law. The bill requires a 2-year comprehensive review of how mental health services are being delivered in public schools across Florida. The law is already in effect, and the Department of Education will be rolling out additional guidance soon to help districts meet these requirements.
And of course, school safety is always a top priority, and this year we saw quite a few changes. Senate Bill 1470 tackled requirements for school security guards, and now agencies that employ guards are responsible for all training and screening costs, and sheriffs can't charge more than their actual expenses. The bill also requires sheriffs to keep thorough documentation of inspections, training, and certifications for every certified guard.
Another bill worth highlighting is HB 1255, which gives districts more authority when it comes to handling persistent behavior issues. Under this law, students showing ongoing disobedience or disrespect must be referred to the school's child study team. It also lays out rules about suspensions, expulsions, and whether educational services are required during these periods. And if a district or charter school allows corporal punishment, their policy must now include a parental permission requirement.
Absolutely. And one of the most talked about the bills this session was House Bill 1105, which we talked about very much on our last episode. Of course, this can also better be known as the cell phone bill. Here's another big takeaway. So, of that, elementary and middle school students won't be allowed to use their phones at all during the day. High schoolers, of course, will still be allowed to have them, but not during instructional time, with few exceptions. On top of that, the Commissioner of Education is going to be working with 6 school districts to test out a full day ban for high schools and then report back on whether it impacts student achievement.
There were also some important updates to rules on threat management. At the July 16th State Board of Education meeting, districts were directed to add a secondary threat management coordinator to back up their primary coordinator. And when it comes to school records, any concerning behavior, communication, or threat that's reported now has to be permanently documented in the state school safety and threat management portal.
Absolutely. So, another thing that is going to affect schools all across Florida that is not necessarily related to statute,
Mhm.
but is we've been talking about how school grades are calculated.
Absolutely. Yes. The Florida Department of Education is recalibrating the cut scores that decide whether a school earns an A, B, C, or lower grade. And the reason is actually built into state law.
So, right now, if more than 75% of high schools statewide earn an A or B, the state has to tighten up the grading scale. This year, about 81% of high schools did just that. So, the Board of Education is required to now raise the bar.
Which means it's about to get tougher for schools to hold on to those A and B grades.
Exactly. And this all ties into the state's transition to the best standards, which is the benchmarks for excellent student thinking. These, of course, are different from the old standards, and the DOE has already updated the cut scores for the FAST assessments and the end of course exams to match that.
And so, just to be clear, when people see different scales, it doesn't mean that the test got easier. It just means it's a new scoring system. The standards themselves remain as tough as they are.
Correct. And bottom line, school grades in Florida are about to mean more than ever. So higher schools scores are going to be required for achieving higher grades, which makes for tougher benchmarks for the schools. And we had some legislation this last year,
Hmm.
Jessica, that we fought hard on that would have dramatically
Yes.
changed those cut scores where a 90 and above would have been an A, 80 would have been a B, and so on. So this is something for sure.
Absolutely. And we'll be watching that closely because, as we've discussed in previous podcasts, just because something died last year doesn't mean that it won't be resurrected this year. So we'll be watching closely for the adjustments that are being made because of previous laws, and then also if they attempt to make any other changes in the next legislative session.
Of course, and I expect our legislative committee will be very engaged in this
Yes.
conversation as we navigate through what comes next. So, while all of this rulemaking and executive action is happening to implement the 2025 session bills, we're also, of course, starting to look ahead seriously at the 2026 legislative session, which kicks off in January. But interim committee meetings will start on October 6th. So that is less than a month away. And that's when lawmakers will begin workshopping new ideas and filing bills for this next session.
It is just around the corner. And before we go today, we do have some big news out of Florida politics that we wanted to mention. Former House Speaker Paul Renner has officially jumped into the 2026 governor's race.
Can't believe it, but he made this announcement last week, and that puts him head to head with Congressman Byron Donalds, who, of course, is running with current President Trump's endorsement.
Renner's pitch is interesting. He is trying to frame himself as both pro Trump and pro DeSantis, and he's really leaning on his record in Tallahassee. He pointed to the expansion of school choice, the scholarship program
Mhm.
expansion, tax cuts, loosening gun regulations as the proof that he helped build the free state of Florida that DeSantis is talking about.
Exactly, and he's not jumping in with the biggest war chest. He is starting with about $1 million and says he'll be visiting all 67 counties to build grassroots momentum.
But here's where it gets a little more interesting. Governor Ron DeSantis does not appear to be on board with
Mm.
his running. At a press conference in Valrico last week following this announcement, he said, I'm not supporting this. I think it was an ill advised decision to enter the race.
That is a pretty cold shoulder there from the governor, especially considering that Renner worked hand in hand with DeSantis to advance many of those conservative policies. It's definitely sending some signals of distance, between the 2, and we still have a session to go, and, of course, there's been other talks of other people running.
Exactly. So here's where we are currently. We have Byron Donalds, who's running with Trump's backing. Renner, he's trying to carry on that DeSantis era legacy, but without clearly the blessing of the governor. And then hanging over all of this is the possibility that other Republicans, of course, could jump in, like Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins, or as we've discussed in a previous podcast, maybe even First Lady Casey DeSantis.
So, I guess bottom line, his entrance makes this GOP primary a lot more complicated. He is betting that experience and a grassroots push can offset not having the biggest endorsements in his corner. A long way to go.
That's right. And as always, we'll keep an eye on how this plays out because Florida's governor's race is already shaping up to be one of the most closely watched contests in 2026.
That's right.
Getting ahead
And
of myself.
as are most things in Florida, as we know,
That's right.
what happens here tends to expand across the country in many ways.
Absolutely.
So, this is our update for this week. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate the way that you are sharing the Leadership Lounge and getting the word out. It is a great opportunity to have others kind of learn the process at the same time as learn the policies. So, we're excited that we can offer this. Remember, all the resources can be found on the FASA website at fasa.net. Make sure to click on the advocacy link and see the full list of bills that were filed last year and passed, as well as some of these low performing school rankings and everything like that. So stay tuned for more updates.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michele White and Jessica Janasiewicz. The podcast is produced by Jeff Willoughby. Special thanks to musical director David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the Leadership Lounge podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topic suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.